SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation. SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
Comfort Moodian භාගයයි කලක් පවතින අලුත් පෙනුමයි.
Tonight, International Showcase. Sri Lanka's head of state is set to address the UN General Assembly shortly as the presidents of China and the United States spar with veiled words.
We'll stand up for our allies and our friends and oppose attempts by stronger countries to dominate weaker ones. But we're not seeking a new Cold War.
Democracy is not a special right reserved to any individual country, but a right for the people of all countries to enjoy.
No interference. The Justice Minister assures Parliament that action will be taken against errant State Minister after independent investigations conclude.
Will the government ensure that the Attorney General is unhindered in taking whatever steps that he deems fit?
It should have never happened, and it was a disgrace. Honorable Attorney General is free. We have never interfered and will never interfere.
Make the right choice. With continued vaccine hesitance shown by young adults, experts say COVID-19 infection alone can affect fertility. A good month. Exports earnings for the month of August show a marked increase, led by apparels, tea and rubber. All this and much more coming up on this Wednesday, the 22nd of September 2021.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයිෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වලකයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanella Fernando in your top stories for tonight. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is all set to make his UN debut today as he will be addressing the Assembly at 9:30 local time tonight. Meanwhile, addressing the UN General Assembly, Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that the world is now on the edge of an abyss. However, the highlight was the addresses by the presidents of the United States and China, where veiled words were used to decry each other's global influence. The 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly began yesterday with the floor being open for the high-level general debate. Inaugurating the session yesterday, Secretary General of the United Nations Antonio Guterres addressed the chamber. In his speech, he sounded an alarm that the world is moving in the wrong direction.
The world must wake up. We are on the edge of an abyss and moving in the wrong direction. COVID and the climate crisis have exposed profound fragilities as societies and as a planet. Yet instead of humility in the face of these epic challenges, we see hubris. Instead of the path of solidarity, we are on a dead end to destruction. At the same time, another disease is spreading in our world today, a malady of mistrust. When people see promises of progress denied by the realities of their harsh daily lives, when they see their fundamental rights and freedoms curtailed, when they see billionaires joyriding to space while millions go hungry on Earth, the people we serve and represent may lose faith not only in their governments and institutions, but in the values that have animated the work of the United Nations for over 75 years.
In his UNGA debut yesterday, President of the United States Joe Biden affirmed that the country will stand up for its allies and oppose attempts by stronger countries to dominate weaker nations.
To defend our vital U.S. national interest, including against ongoing and imminent threats, U.S. military power must be our tool of last resort, not our first. And it should not be used as an answer to every problem we see around the world. All of the major powers of the world have a duty to carefully manage their relationships so they do not tip from responsible competition to conflict. The United States will compete and will compete vigorously and lead with our values and our strength. We'll stand up for our allies and our friends and oppose attempts by stronger countries to dominate weaker ones, whether through changes to territory by force, economic coercion, technical exploitation, or disinformation. But we're not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks. The United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreements in other areas.
Meanwhile, in his address, Chinese President Xi Jinping, in what was somewhat of a veiled comment aimed at the US administration, insisted that democracy is not a special right reserved for an individual country, but a right for people of all countries to enjoy.
China will continue to support and engage in global science-based origins tracing and stands firmly opposed to political maneuvering in whatever form. We should care about the special needs of developing countries. We may employ such means as debt suspension and development aid to help developing countries, particularly vulnerable ones facing exceptional difficulties, with the emphasis on addressing unbalanced and inadequate development among and within countries. Democracy is not a special right reserved to any individual country, but a right for the people of all countries to enjoy. Recent developments in the international situation show once again that military intervention from the outside and so-called democratic transformation entail nothing but harm. We need to advocate peace, development, equity, justice, democracy and freedom, which are the common values of humanity, and reject the practice of forming small circles or zero-sum games.
Meanwhile, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is set to address the UN General Assembly at 9:30 local time tonight. He is also scheduled to speak at the Food Systems Summit and the high-level dialogue on energy, which will be held tomorrow and the day after. Meanwhile, the president met with his Latvian counterpart, Egils Levits, yesterday. The two heads of states have exchanged views on measures to be taken for the betterment of the tourism industry in both their nations at a time when the pandemic situation is subsiding. The focus has also fallen on enhancing cooperation between the two countries in the fields of education and digital technology. Justice Minister Ali Sabri today responded to questions posed by Ahila Ilange Tamil Congress parliamentarian Gajendra Kumar Ponnambalam on the controversial incidents reported at the Valikada and Anuradhapura prisons involving a supposedly inebriated State Minister Lohan Ratwatte, where LTTE detainees were threatened at gunpoint. The Justice Minister assured Parliament that investigations currently underway by the CID, the Human Rights Council and a retired High Court judge will be free and independent, and that any action against the errant State Minister will be determined by their findings.
Ahila Ilanke Tamil Congress parliamentarian Gajendra Kumar Ponnambalam today took up the Valikada and Anuradhapura prisons incident involving State Minister Lohan Ratwatte, where he posed several questions to the government regarding action to be taken against him. Key among the questions were whether the government intends to allow the Kandy District MP to continue to hold ministerial portfolios.
Given the nature of the criminal conduct of the individual concerned, not only can he no longer be the subject minister in charge of prisons and prisoners' affairs, but in fact he should not be holding any portfolio in government and be a member of parliament itself. Accordingly, will the government ensure that he will be no longer holding any portfolios and take steps to remove him from parliament? Will the government ensure that the Attorney General is unhindered in taking whatever steps that he deems fit, including the arrest of the individual concerned and prosecution under all relevant laws that have been breached? Given that the present government, like its predecessor, has accepted the draconian nature of the PTA, and given that none of the Tamil political prisoners would have been under custody had the said PTA been in accordance with accepted international human rights standards and good practices, will the government at least now release the PTA detainees immediately?
Responding to the questions, Justice Minister Ali Sabri offered an apology to the victims of the incident, calling it a disgraceful act that will be dealt with after investigations by the Criminal Investigations Department, the Human Rights Council and other authorities are concluded.
At the outset, let me unequivocally and unconditionally condemn the incident which had taken place. It should have never happened, and it was a disgrace. Having said so, let me also tender my apology to the victims and their family members for whatever the difficulties we had to undergo. I also must ensure that the law enforcement authorities have already commenced investigation. CID had commenced its investigation. Human Rights Commission independently had commenced its investigation, had gone to the scene and recorded statement. Similarly, the Witness Protection and Victims and Witness Protection Authority, which comes under my ministry, had already written to them to ensure the safety and security and dignity of these prisoners and the detainees, because they are under the custody of the government, and government has the responsibility to take care and ensure their safety. We do agree on that. It is in that sense we also yesterday at the cabinet decided that we will appoint a retired High Court judge to inquire into this independently and report to us, and thereafter to take further action. He has already stepped down from the ministry concerned, so therefore no interference into the investigation which has been carried on. Honorable Attorney General is free, absolutely free, because we, as a matter of fact, we have never interfered and will never interfere in individual cases as to what to be done, what not to be done. PTA is an exception. Exception was required because unconventional methods terrorists in the past used to wage a war on the country. So we need to protect the national security and national interest of this country. When the national security is secured, every one of them is secure. Due to the dastardly and terrorist attack carried out by Saharan and his clan, PTA has to be again used. We have appointed a committee to look into the several provisions of the PTA in order to strike a fine balance between the national security and the liberty and the freedom of the subject. But let me also tell that in 1979 PTA was established. There is a provision in the PTA to appoint an advisory board in order to advise the defense minister. Somebody who had been detained under PTA should be continue to detain under that. But no government for the last 40 years had appointed that advisory committee. His Excellency the President, as the Minister of Defense, 3 weeks ago appointed a respectable independent panel of advisors to look into those cases. So if you feel, Honourable Member, someone had been taken into custody under the PTA, he should not have been taken. You can make an application to the advisory committee. They will look into that, call the necessary parties, go through it and advise the President accordingly.
US-based New Fortress Energy announced that it has signed a definitive agreement for a 40% investment in West Coast Power Private Limited, which gives the company the rights to develop a new liquid natural gas terminal off the coast of Colombo, which will supply natural gas to the country's existing 300-megawatt Udanganavi power plant in Kerawalapitiya. However, Ceylon Electricity Board Engineers Union says that the agreement has been entered into outside of usual tender procedures.
In July this year, US-based New Fortress Energy signed a framework agreement with the Sri Lankan government to construct a new offshore liquefied natural gas receiving, storage and regasification terminal. The company said that the terminal will be located off the coast of Colombo to supply gas to the island's power plants, primarily located at the Kerawalapitiya power complex. Further, as part of the agreement, New Fortress will also supply natural gas to the existing 300-megawatt Yugadanavi power plant and will negotiate the purchase of 40% stake in West Coast Power Private Limited that owns the power plant. However, yesterday, New Fortress Energy stated on its official website that the Sri Lankan government jointly announced that they have executed a definitive agreement for New Fortress's investment with West Coast Power Private Limited, along with the rights to develop a new LNG terminal off the coast of Colombo. The terminal is expected to begin operation in 2023. Chairman and CEO of New Fortress Energy, Wes Eden, says that this is a significant milestone for Sri Lanka's transition to cleaner fuels and a more reliable, affordable power source. Further, New Fortress will also acquire a 40% ownership stake in West Coast Power as well. However, speaking on the matter, the Ceylon Electricity Board Engineers Union says that the agreement has been made outside of usual tender procedures.
ඇමරිකානු නිව් ෆෝර්ට්‍රස් කියන සමාගම අවශ්‍යතාවය තියෙන්නේ වෙස්ට් කෝස්ට් බලාගාරයේ 140 ලබා ගැනීම නෙවෙයි. ඒගොල්ලන්ට අවශ්‍යතාවය තියෙන්නේ මේ රටට LNG ලබා දීමේ දීර්ඝකාලීන කොන්ත්‍රාත්තු ලබා ගැනීම. ඔය රතු පාට නැවක් තියෙන්නේ ඕකෙන් තමයි LNG ප්‍රවාහනය කරන්නේ. ඒතර ඔය පර්යන්තය කෙරළපිටිය කිලෝමීටර් 6ක් මුහුදේ මේක නැංගුරම්ලා තියෙනවා. අපි ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් හදාගෙන තියෙනවා ලංකා විදුලි මණ්ඩලය සහ ඛනිජ තෙල් නීතිගත සංස්ථාව ටෙන්ඩර් පොත් හදලා ඒක අපි කොහොමද අපේ රටට LNG ගේන්න ඕනේ කියලා. එතකොට මේ යටිතල පහසුකම් ටික මේ පර්යන්තය සහ නල පද්ධතිය ගන්න ටෙන්ඩරේ දැන් දාලා තියෙනවා. ඒ ටෙන්ඩර් එක ඕපන් කරන්න සතියක් තියෙද්දි තමයි මේ නිව් ෆෝර්ට්‍රස් එක හොර ගිවිසුමකට යන්න ඇස්ති වෙන්නේ. ඒ නිසා මේක රටක මොන විදියකටත් නොවිය යුතු දෙයක්.
The matter was also taken up before the cabinet media briefing today.
දැනට තියෙන භාණ්ඩාගාර ආරංචිවල හැටියට සංකල්පමය එකඟතාවයකට පැමිණි බවයි දැනගන්නට තියෙන්නේ. එසේ වෙතත් මම දුර්බල ඇමතිවරයා විදියටත් මිට පෙරින් හිටපු අවස්ථාවකදීත් මගේ ස්ථාවරය අතිකරු ජනාධිපතිතුමාටත් කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයටත් මම මේක දැනුම් දීලා තියෙනවා. දුර්බල මණ්ඩලය විසින් ටෙන්ඩර් ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමට යෝජිත කාලවකවානුව ඇතුලේ එයට කිසිදු බාධාවක් ඇති නොවන ආකාරයකට කටයුතු කළ යුතුයි කියලා කියන එක තමයි අපි හැමදෙනාගේම ස්ථාවරය. මොකද LNG සැපයීම කිසියම් විදේශ රටක ඒකාධිකාරයක්ව පැවතිය යුතු නෑ කියලා කියන එක.
More news on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
Big 3.
Welcome back. In more news, the Cabinet of Ministers have given the green light to obtain an additional loan of $100 million from the World Bank under its Strategic Preparation and Response to COVID-19 program. The financial facility will be utilized to procure 14 million doses of Pfizer vaccine, as well as to finance other expenses pertaining to the national vaccination drive. During the Cabinet media briefing today, Cabinet spokesperson Dallas Alahaperuma was quizzed about the progress of plans to reopen schools.
මේ සතියේ ඉඳලා ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙනවා ආබාධ සහිත දූ දරුවන් එන්නත් ලබා දීම සඳහා ඊට අමතරව ඊයේ අධ්‍යාපන ඇමතිවරයාත් මේ පිළිබඳ නිවේදනයක් කරා වයස අවුරුදු 15ක් 19ක් අතර වයස් කාණ්ඩේ ඉන්න විශේෂයෙන්ම උසස් පෙළ සාමාන්‍ය පෙළ දූ පුතුන් ඉලක්ක කරගත්තු එන්නත් බඩස්ථානක් කඩිනමින් ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙනවා. ඒ නිසා අපි ඊටාම ධනාත්මකව බලාගෙන ඉන්නවා අපේ දූල පුතාලා නැවත පාසලට පැමිණෙන දිනය අපිට ආසන්න වෙන බව දැනෙනවා.
Meanwhile, the recent detection of harmful bacteria in samples of organic fertilizer scheduled to be imported was also taken up during the briefing.
එක සාම්පලයක් හොඳින් තිබිලා තිබෙනවා. සීල් නොකර තිබෙන ලද සාම්පල් එක මෙම අහිතකර බැක්ටීරියා ඇතුළත් වී තිබීම පිළිබඳව රජය දැඩි සැලකිල්ලෙන් පසු වුණා සහ ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් විමර්ශනයක් කරන්න කියලා දැනටමත් ගරු පුෂ්කර මැතිතුමා ඉල්ලීමක් කළා තියෙනවා. සම්ප්‍රදායකට ඕනම ඖෂධ හෝ පොහොර වැනි ද්‍රව්‍ය රටට ගෙනීමෙන් පසුව ටෙන්ඩරයට පෙර ආතුව සාම්පල් ලබා ගන්නවා වගේම රටට එම භාණ්ඩ ගෙනීමෙන් පසුවත් අහම්බු ලෙස සාම්පල් අරගෙන පරීක්ෂා කිරීම පිළිගත් දීර්ඝකාලීන ක්‍රමවේදයක්. නිසා අදාළ සාම්පල් නැවත ලබාගෙන ඒවා තත්වයෙන් ඉහළ පොහොර බවට නිර්දේශ ලබා ගන්නවා වගේම එම ප්‍රධාන පොහොර සැපයුම් කිරීමෙන් පසුව රටට ලබා ගැනීමෙන් පසුවත් සාම්පල් ලබාගෙන අදාළ ප්‍රමිතීන්ට අනුගතව එම සැපයුම් සිදු කර තිබෙන බවට වග බලා ගැනීම රජයේ යුතුයකමක්. ඒ නිසා අපි පැහැදිලිව සහතික වෙනවා රටට අහිතකර කිසිදු ශුද්‍ර ජීවියෙක් හෝ බැක්ටීරියාවක් සහිත පොහොර ද්‍රව්‍යයක් රටට ආනයනය නොකරන බවටත් ඉතාම පැහැදිලිව සඳහන් කරනවා.
Meanwhile, the latest government decisions taken during yesterday's cabinet meeting were also announced. Accordingly, the Cabinet has approved the release of an Urban Development Authority-owned plot of land spanning 37 acres to Colombo Bird Park Limited. Located in Madivilla, the land will be leased for 30 years to construct a bird sanctuary and other related structures. The Cabinet has also given the green light to obtain an additional loan of $100 million from the World Bank under the Strategic Preparation and Response to COVID-19 program. The National Task Force on COVID has decided that the funds will be used to procure 14 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine and to meet other costs in its vaccination program. The Cabinet of Ministers also granted permission for the implementation of 4 projects in the field of environmental pollution and chemicals management. The projects will be financed by the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, a specific international program under the Minamata Convention, the United Nations Environmental Program and the Government of Switzerland and the UN's Industrial Development Program. The Cabinet meanwhile also gave the go-ahead to develop the Galle Port under a public-private partnership project. The Ministry of Ports Authority previously proposed the development of the port, enabling it to be maintained as a regional commercial port. Also approved was a proposal to increase the government's credit limit of 2,997 billion rupees contained in Appropriation Act No. 7 of 2020 by another 400 billion rupees, as well as to make the necessary amendments to the Act. The proposal has been approved due to declining government revenue prompted by the COVID-19 situation and the difficulties faced in paying salaries. Consultant venereologist at the Anuradhapura Teaching Hospital, Dr. Ajit Karavita, allayed fears of vaccines having harmful effects on sexual and reproductive health. He then went on to say that although a few cases of a reduction in sperm counts have been reported, it was only among COVID patients with serious cases, but cannot be regarded as leading to infertility. With vaccinations of everyone aged over 30 almost coming to an end in the country, the vaccination drive was extended to the 20 to 29-year age group earlier this month in a bid to slow down virus spread. However, during the recent weeks, the health experts complained of an apparent lack of enthusiasm among young adults over rumours on fertility issues. Health experts in the past week have tried to address the issue by denouncing the claims as fake news being spread by anti-vaccination groups. However, the situation doesn't seem to have improved. At the media briefing organised by the Health Promotion Bureau today, consultant venereologist at the Anuradhapura Teaching Hospital, Dr. Ajit Karavita added his voice to the subject of fertility issues, saying that there is no such evidence to prove such effects of vaccines.
මේ ප්‍රාණඝාතය සම්බන්ධ ප්‍රශ්නේ ගත්තාම ඒක කොවිඩ් උත්සන්න යම් යම් වයස අවුරුදු 40ට වඩා වැඩි කොවිඩ් උත්සන්න රෝගී වෙච්ච කිහිප දෙනෙකුගේ වාර්තා වෙලා තියෙනවා මේ ඊට පස්සේ ප්‍රාණඝාතභාවයේ ප්‍රශ්නයක් ආවා කියලා. එහෙම කේස් රිපෝට් තියෙන්නේ. දැන් ඒ මත පාදක වෙලා සමස්තය එයයි කල්පනා කිරීම හරියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒක අයිසොලේටඩ් එහෙම නැත්නම් මේ හුදකලා අවස්ථා කීපයක්. ඉතින් ඒ මත ඉඳගෙන අපිට බෑ ඇත්තටම මෙච්චර ජනතාවක් බේර ගන්න පුළුවන් මේ ඉන්නත් කරන වැඩසටහනක් වගේ එකක් පස්සට ගන්න. ඒ කොහෙත්ම අදාළ නැහැ. මොකද එන්නත නෙමෙයි ඒකට සම්බන්ධ. වැක්සින් කිරීම කිසිම විදිහකින් ලිංගික සෞඛ්‍ය සඳහා කිසිදු එහෙම බලපෑමක් පෙන්වුම් කරන්නේ නැහැ.
What's more, Dr. Karavita also went on to say that although a reduction in sperm counts has been observed in patients whose COVID-19 infection was serious, it doesn't necessarily translate to infertility.
දැඩි ලෙස රෝගාතුර වෙච්ච අයගේ සමහරවිට ස්පර්ම් වල අඩුවක් පෙන්වන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි ඒක කිසිම විදිහක වඳභාවයටපත් වීමක් කියලා සලකන්න බෑ. ඉතින් ඒක නිසා කොවිඩ් උත්සන්න වීමේ අවස්ථාවල එවැනි කාරණා කීපයක් ආරංචි වෙලා තියෙනවා සටහන් කරලා තියෙනවා. හැබැයි ඒ කොවිඩ් රෝගේ එන්නත නිසා නෙමෙයි. ඉතින් ඇත්තටම එවැනි සැකසහිත නම් අපි යෝජනා කරන්නේ ඔයගොල්ලෝ වැක්සින් එක ගහගන්න. එතකොට ඒ පස්සේ නෑනේ.
Meanwhile, as of last evening, 13,906,987 persons have received first doses of a COVID-19 vaccine. Of that number, 11,203,890 persons have received their second doses. Meanwhile, State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Professor Channa Jayasamana, said yesterday that the administration of the Pfizer vaccines to children above 12 years of age with disabilities will commence from Friday. The drive is expected to commence at the Lady Ridgeway Hospital in Colombo. Sri Lanka is currently witnessing a downward trend in the daily COVID-19 cases being reported. However, Deputy Director General of Education and Research at the Ministry of Health, Dr. Hemantha Herath, says that institutional measures to control the virus spread are a must to maintain this declining trend once the country reopens.
In the past few weeks, the daily COVID-19 infections reported in the country have started to decline. Yesterday, the number was a comparatively low 1,321. This is the first time that COVID-19 infections have been reported below the 1,500 mark since the 7th of July. With that, health experts are of the view that the ongoing quarantine curfew has been successful in reducing public gatherings.
තෙන්දී අපිට දකින දේ තමා අපේ එලිමහනේ ගත කරන පුද්ගලයෝ තාමත් අපි දකිනවා විශාල ප්‍රමාණයකට. නමුත් කඩවල් ඇතුලේ එක්රැස් වෙන කණ්ඩායම් හැරුණුකොට අනිකුත් තැන්වල එක්රැස් වීම යම් ප්‍රමාණයකට අඩු වෙලා තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම උත්සව සාද මරණ ගෙවල් මගුල් ගෙවල් අඩු වීම හරහා අපි දැනුවත්ව හෝ නොදැනුවත්ව ජනතාව මහා පරිමාණයෙන් එක්රැස් වීම අවම වෙලා තියෙනවා. එවැනි තත්ත්වයන් සාධනීය ලෙස අපි දකිනවා.
However, health experts are also of the view that the safety measures at an institutional level must continue once the country reopens in order to keep the COVID-19 situation under control.
අපිට හැමදාම වහගෙන ඉන්න බෑ. කවදා හරි මේ රට අරින්න වෙනවා. ඒ අවස්ථාවන් වලදී මේ තත්ත්වය වෙනස් වෙන්න ඉඩ තියෙන නිසා තමයි රට විවෘත කළ පසු අපි මේ පත්වය පවත්වාගෙන යාමට අවශ්‍ය කරන සැලසුම් ඒ ආයතන මගින් මේකට කවුරුවත් බලාගෙන ඉන්න එපා. ආයතනයක මෙවැනි පොදි ගැසීම් එක්රැස්වීම් වළක්වනවා අවශ්‍ය වුණොත් ඒ සඳහා අවශ්‍ය කරන වගකීම ඒ අයම දරාගෙන මේවා සූදානම් කර ගැනීමෙන් තමන්ගේ ආරක්ෂාව මුලින්ම සපයා ගැනීමෙන් තමන්ගේ ආයතනය හරහා හෝ වෙළඳසැල හරහා අනික් අයට තියෙන ආරක්ෂාවක් ලබා දීමට කටයුතු කිරීම මගේ තේ ඉතාම වැදගත් වෙනවා.
In the meantime, 882 COVID-19 patients recovered and were discharged from hospitals during the day. This takes the country's total number of recoveries to 435,022.
We'll return after a short commercial break. Do stay with us. Welcome back in business news. Merchandise exports for August have recorded an increase of 14.4% to $1.083 billion rather compared to $947.2 million recorded in August 2020. Earnings in the apparel sector, rubber, tea and seafood exports have contributed to the increase.
According to customs data, Sri Lanka's merchandise exports for August 2021 recorded an increase of 14.4% to $1.083 billion compared to $947.2 million recorded in the previous year. Of this figure, export earnings from the apparel sector showed an increase of 12.13% year-on-year to $491.5 million during the month. A strong performance in apparel exports was seen with a 12.84% increase, and in woven fabrics, which showed a massive 312.9% increase. However, on a year-on-year basis, exports of made-up textile articles and yarn and other textile articles declined by 64.31% and 20.88% respectively. Meanwhile, tea export earnings for August, which made up 12% of merchandise exports, increased by 13.41% year-on-year to $116.78 million, while export volumes also increased by 16.1% compared to August 2020. Further, export earnings from rubber and rubber finished products increased by 27.31% year-on-year to $92.34 million in August, with strong performance in exports of pneumatic and retreated rubber tires and tubes with a 33.02% increase, and industrial and surgical gloves that showed a 36.89% increase. In addition, earnings from all the major categories of coconut-based products increased in August compared with last year, with desiccated coconut, liquid coconut milk and coconut cream products increasing by 42.82%, 13.8% and 72.94% respectively. In the meantime, export earnings from seafood increased by 19.65% to $165.48 million in August compared to the previous year. This increase was mainly due to the increase in earnings from export of fresh or chilled fish, shrimps and prawns, and lobsters and crabs. Meanwhile, export earnings from electrical and electronic products increased by 11.48%, while food and beverages were up by 30.39% on a year-on-year basis as well.
Headline inflation, meanwhile, has decreased marginally to 6.7% in August. However, year-on-year food inflation showed a rise during the month of 11.1% from 11% in the previous month.
Headline inflation, as measured by the year-on-year change in the National Consumer Price Index, decreased marginally to 6.7 in August 2021 from 6.8% in July 2021, attributed entirely to the statistical effect of the high base that prevailed in August 2020. Meanwhile, year-on-year food inflation increased marginally to 11.1% in August from 11% in July, while year-on-year non-food inflation decreased to 3% in August from 3.2% in July. Further, the NCPI, measured on an annual average basis, increased marginally to 5.5% in August from 5.4% in July. The monthly change in the NCPI, which was recorded at 0.36% in August, was attributed to increases in prices of items in both the food and non-food categories. Accordingly, within the food category, prices of sugar, potatoes and fresh fish increased, whereas prices of rice, coconut oil and coconuts recorded decreases. Moreover, prices of items in the non-food category recorded an increase, mainly due to the price increases observed in the alcoholic beverages and tobacco and health subcategories during the month. Further, year-on-year core inflation increased to 4.7% in August 2021 from 4.4% in July, while annual average core inflation remained unchanged for the fifth consecutive month at 4.4% in August 2021.
The all-share price index gained 17.66 points to close at 8,788.05, while the S&P SL20 index gained 16.71 points to end at 3,283.50. The market turnover was 2.5 billion rupees. Here's Dimantha Matthew with a brief report on today's market performance.
Today we saw a bit of a reversal in the market from the continuous downtrend that we saw over the past 3 days. So with that, we are seeing the index slightly moving up by around 17 points to close at 8,788 points. So we saw more buying interest coming into the two key sectors, that is the transportation and the capital goods sector, to keep the ASPI afloat. In addition to that, we saw turnover slightly improved than the previous day, 2.5 billion rupees of turnover.
With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.